My name is Sylvia Gonzalez. I am Director of Research at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute. Today's webinar brings us together a year after the Eaton Fire to take pause and reflect on the ongoing recovery efforts in Altadena. Over the past year, alongside our partners on the ground and at the UCLA Center for Neighborhood Knowledge, LPPI has been tracking recovery progress, challenges, and emerging needs in Altadena. As you'll hear today, Altadena has demonstrated a resilient and powerful community working together to come back, but within a system that has not served them equally. The data that we'll be sharing today shows that many families and small businesses remain stalled in the recovery. Nearly 7 in 10 homes that suffered severe damage show no visible progress, delays fueled by insurance challenges, rising costs, and the complex process of rebuilding. Homeowners have also faced significant setbacks, often having no choice but to sell their properties to outside investors. Tenants, who make up a quarter of Altadena's population, are experiencing displacement, particularly in limited, affordable, and rent-controlled housing. Meanwhile, small businesses continue to struggle, particularly those that are smaller, less resourced, home-based, and minority-owned. Our research also shows systemic inequities as communities of color in Altadena were among the hardest hits. So what's on today's agenda? Today's discussion will begin with a brief presentation of our existing research on the impacts and recovery in Altadena, and then we will be followed by a panel discussion. We will then close out with a Q&A with all of you that are attending with us today. Next slide, please. The speakers today include Gabby Carmona, our Senior Research Analyst at LPPI, who has been leading our housing research in Altadena. She'll walk us through some of the key findings from our work to help ground the conversation. LPPI Director of Communications, Alberto Lammers, will moderate our panel featuring Katie Clark, organizer and co-founder of Altadena Tenants Union, Lori Gray, President and CEO of Neighborhood Housing Services of Los Angeles County, Diana Gonzalez, a small business owner of Cactus Foods, and Joy Chen, Executive Director of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. The panelists will discuss the impacts on the community, barriers to recovery, and what steps can help support a more equitable rebuilding process. After, we will close the program with an audience Q&A. We want to be in conversation with you, so we encourage you to ask questions during this time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Finally, before passing the floor to Gabby, we'd like to take a moment to thank Capital One Insight Center and the Conrad and Hilton Foundation for supporting this research and today's conversation. Again, thank you for being here, and Gabby, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So since the start of the Eden and Palisades fire, our team has been really focused on providing timely equity-centered data to help benchmark recovery across the county. But today I'm going to walk us through our specific data for the Eden Fire and Altadena specifically, and what it can tell us about the scale of the impact, who was most affected, and what recovery has really looked like for the community at large. So as this slide shows, the Eden Fire will go down as the 5th deadliest and 2nd most destructive wildfire in California. So its burn area was roughly about 14,000 acres. It destroyed or damaged more than 10,500 structures and put over 200,000 people at risk of displacement. But what makes Altadena stand out within these statistics is that when we overlay the Eden Fire perimeter, we see that nearly the entire community of Altadena was engulfed. So that means homes, schools, and businesses were really and truly impacted all at once. But Altadena is also of particular importance because of how it challenges some common narratives about who gets impacted and is affected by wildfires. Before the fire, Altadena was a deeply diverse community. Over half of its households identified as a racial or ethnic minority, and this diversity extended into homeownership. So nearly 70% of the non-white households were homeowners prior to the fire, and that includes a really long history of multi-generational Black homeownership dating back as far as the 1960s. And Altadena was also home to a robust local economy, with anywhere from 1,000 to over 4,000 private businesses. But at the same time, that diversity came with some distinct vulnerabilities that really shaped how residents first experienced and were impacted by the fire, but also the later difficulty that lied ahead when it comes to recovery. So even though Altadena is often described as a relatively affluent community, inequality was significant. Prior to the fire, 1 in 6 residents lived below twice the federal poverty line, with Latinos disproportionately represented among the lowest income households. Housing costs were also stretching families thin. About 17% of residents were severely housing cost burdened, which refers to paying over 50% of their income in housing. And that share was even higher among the tenants. And critically, most businesses in Altadena were micro businesses, so often employing only 1 to 4 people, operating out of homes, and highly capital constrained. And these sorts of businesses are often the least likely to absorb a huge financial shock caused by something like a wildfire. So with these conditions in mind, we approached our analysis on the immediate impact of the fire with an explicit equity lens, asking not just how much damage occurred, but also who faced the potential steepest barriers to recovery. So our first key takeaway in examining the impact of the fire was both that the fire was widespread but also particularly severe. So across the board, roughly 7 in 10 properties, including small businesses, single-family homes, and rental properties, fell within the fire perimeter. And that destruction rate within those was also extremely high. So between 37 to 47% of small businesses, 46% of single-family homes, and 41% of rental properties were completely destroyed by the fire. That meant that for many households and business owners, recovery wasn't just about a couple repairs, it really meant starting from scratch. And that impact was also unfortunately unevenly distributed. So among most destroyed businesses, we found that they were micro businesses, so reinforcing concerns about limited access to capital and insurance to recover and rebuild. When we looked at homeowners, we found that Black households were particularly hit. So 58% of Black-owned single-family homes were destroyed compared to 45% of white-owned homes. And in the rental market, destruction was geographically concentrated. So we found that more than 3/4 of the destroyed rental properties were located in West Altadena, which has been historically more racially diverse, lower income, and home to more Latino and Black residents. So even at the moment of impact, we found that inequality was really already baked into the geography in Altadena. So that brings us to the important questions about how this has played out in recovery. What has it looked like, and who seems likely to return? So while our latest data benchmarks recovery actually at the 7-month mark after the fire, we have many reasons to suspect, given recent surveys from other partners and ongoing internal analyses on the recovery, that many of the patterns that I'm going to highlight now still stand true today. So first, when it comes to property sales, we found that they have been relatively limited, suggesting that many residents may still have intentions of rebuilding and returning. But when we look closer at who sold and what's been sold, there are some warning signs. So first off, most sold properties with businesses were tied to micro businesses, pointing to a potential loss of local entrepreneurship that really defined Altadena prior to the fire. Among single-family homes sold, nearly 2/3, 64%, were purchased by real estate investors, raising concerns about the long-term displacement of those past homeowners, but also future changes in the housing landscape. And half of the sold rental properties had rents below $2,000, signaling the potential loss of naturally affordable housing, which we already know is very hard to come by in a county like LA. And so for those who haven't sold their properties, many remain in a state of limbo, uncertain about whether to rebuild, or in the cases of small businesses, to remain operational. So for homeowners, only 23% of destroyed single-family homes had filed a construction permit. For rental properties, that number dropped to just 8%, which really helps explain why displaced tenants continue to face such uncertainty about the prospects of returning. And then for small businesses, we're seeing about 140 to 160 businesses delisted entirely, the majority of which were micro businesses. And so taken together, this kind of tells us the story that recovery is not only slow, but it is also very unresolved. Some actors are kind of stuck waiting still, while others are deciding to exit entirely. And so I'll close out just by looking ahead a little bit, because we are continuing to update this work as recovery evolves, and today's conversation is really part of that ongoing process for us. So in the next coming months, we plan to release 2 new research products. First is a small business policy toolkit focused on policy levers that can better support micro businesses and minority-owned businesses in the recovery process. And second is a research brief on Altadena tenants and the rental landscape, which will document the rental properties prior to the fire, what was impacted by the fire, and its implications for longer-term displacement and affordability. And so together, this work is better. It is meant to keep recovery visible and also make sure that equity stays at the center of rebuilding as it continues. And so with that, I'd like to kick it over to my colleague Alberto and our panelists now for a discussion that will help us bring these findings into conversation with the lived experiences and on-the-ground recovery efforts.
Thank you, Gabby. Hello, I'm Alberto Lammers, the Director of Communications at LPPI. We're ready to start our panel discussion. Again, with us today are Katie Clark, organizer and co-founder of Altadena Tenants Union, Diana Gonzalez, small business owner of Cactus Foods, Joy Chang, executive director of Eaton Fire Survivors Network. Our fourth panelist, we are still waiting for her to join us, so she may do that during our discussion. Oh, I believe she's here. Welcome, Lori. Lori Gay is president and CEO of the Neighborhood Housing Services of LA County. All right, let's begin our panel. The first question is for all of the panelists. We'd like to hear from each one of you. When you think about recovery, what does it mean to you and your community? Let's start with Katie.
Sure, thanks so much. So I think there's been a lot of rhetoric around recovery from the earliest days of the fire all the way till now. And I think that that often elides two important stages. One is stabilization. People have to be stable. They have to be in stable housing. They have to have stable economic circumstances, stable infrastructure in their lives to even begin to make decisions about what recovery looks like. And so, what we have seen, certainly for, I would say, the majority of tenants and renters in Altadena, is that so many people are still struggling to even stabilize. So, the question of what a recovery looks like at an individual level, much less at a community level, is still very far down the road when you're not sure where you're going to be living next week, if you're going to be able to pay your bills, how you're going to be able to solve basic fundamental survival challenges. So that stabilization process is one that is still very much at play for a lot of fire survivors.
Thank you, Katie. Joy, how about you?
I think that, building on what Katie says about stability, to me, where stability has come from is money. Money is dictating what people's experiences here. We're seeing this. Eaton Fire Survivors Network is a community of over 10,000 Eaton and Palisades fire survivors. And what we're seeing is that some people are moving along to rebuild, but that it often comes down to money. We're seeing two groups of people able to rebuild or to get started rebuilding. One is people with wealth before the fire. If you had $3 or $5 million lying around in stocks or even retirement savings before the fire, and you can liquidate that and move on with your life if you choose to, then you're rebuilding, right? But if you don't, there's two groups. One is pre-fire wealth, and the other is if you were lucky enough to have your insurance company pay out fully and timely, which I'm one of the very, very few minority who is in that position, we're able to come back. I'm back in my house for that reason. But for many, many people who don't have the funds, who don't have the pre-fire wealth, who don't have those big, huge insurance payouts, we're seeing, in many cases, trauma compounding every single day. Right now, specifically, we're finding that 7 out of 10 Eaton and Palisades fire survivors are still displaced, and most who have insurance are running out of insurance housing coverage in the coming months.
Thank you for that, Joy. Diana, what about you?
Thank you, Alberto. Yes, I'm going to reiterate what Katie and Joy have said and said very well. It's stability and resources. I'm grateful to UCLA that we're still even having these conversations. They're so timely. Yes, it's been a year, but a year almost we blink and it doesn't feel like anything, to be honest. Me personally, we lost both our home and my small business. So I was impacted financially, but to Katie's point, stability. My business had to take a second priority. I had to first stabilize, find out where we were going to live. I have two small children as well. And so thankfully, I had my family to fall back on, but I know that there are many more people much more vulnerable. Um, we'll get more into the weeds about grant opportunities and so forth, but I found that when I was ready to seek out business support, a lot of it had dried up. There was not a lot of grants no longer available, or even when it came to housing, we saw the statistics, all the people that were displaced, whether their home was a total loss or they couldn't go back because our water hadn't been turned on and so forth. We were competing in a housing market trying to find where to live. And so many people couldn't take advantage of the free opportunities like free mattresses when they didn't have a place to live. Where were they going to put it? Where were they going to pick it up? And so my conversations with a lot of my neighbors and fellow fire victims were like, we couldn't accept the help that was available when it was available. And now that we're coming up for air, there's not a lot out there. And so I think continuing these dialogues is critical.
Thank you, Diana. Lori, I would love to hear your perspective.
I want to make sure not to duplicate what my other esteemed panelists have already said. I will say something that's difficult. And there's just times to form a line, right? The federal government failed us in both fire zones. And whether it was the normal stuff we see post-disaster with FEMA, SBA, and others, we have, I don't know, 1,500 clients plus or minus right now that are active in some way, but they're also running around with instability to multiple other groups, looking for free, looking for discounted, looking for some stability. It's really about stability, like has been said. When FEMA, SBA, OES, and others aren't doing their job at 100%, for whatever the reasons are, we don't need to get into all that, but it didn't finish. And we have 20% of the people, 30% of the people having full benefits, and the rest are in some pending application or some partial distribution, or, oh, I got the initial 750 and that's all I got. And now I've got to appeal. That's a problem. That then leverage it multiplies because the rest of the system needs to work where CDBG-DR, Community Development Block Grant, disaster resource funding, needs to be in the pipeline to be here so that it takes up where insurance leaves off, as Joy was mentioning, that people are running out of the money. So NHS represents both a community development financial institution, a financial educator, and a redevelopment entity. We're all three. And we've served as the region's largest affordable home ownership provider for more than 30 some years of our 41 years. We're not proud of any of that, but I've often said we've been by ourselves as a comprehensive group for a long, long time. And when this hit, I was devastated. I'm devastated every day because I know the work it takes to build a house. 99% of families don't do that, Alberto. They don't do it. So to expect this to just happen somehow, right? The technical expertise to do that work is unsurpassed. And so I've loved, let me say this, what I've seen with so many people jumping in. I've loved the technicians. We've been doing rebuilding workshops for months now, and that's been a blessing, right? How many families have been able to come through and sit with technical experts as a free service and know that they can get the guidance. But my goodness, you're talking about building a whole house. Or even on the repair side, getting rid of smoke damage is not a small thing, right? It's in your soil now. So what are we going to do about that? And so I think there's a long road ahead. Disaster happens somewhere every day in the world. These are not new concepts, not new ideas. It's how do we replicate the replicable ones, right? How do we replicate the good stuff here? And then look out for people's money, because in the end, money is the driver. And I think, Joy, you said very clearly about insurance, no insurance, pre-disaster wealth. This is some of the worst we've seen it in our experience in this region. And we've been a first responder since 1992. And so I think it's tough. But on the other side of it is all the technical help that's available. And with tomorrow's big day and this big week, as we commemorate, remember, celebrate recovery, what I'm saying my prayers about every moment that I can get a break to say a prayer, right, is that people don't forget. We need to bring the world's attention right back here to LA region, to the Eaton Fire Zone, the Palisades Fire Zone, right? Malibu, and not give off weird pictures. Everyone's not destitute. And even if they were, we should be our brother's keeper right now. And so that's, for me, that's, I'm saying these prayers, right? Just these little whispers, saying, you know, please let people see how important it is that we all chip in, we all share, we all give, and help our neighbor.
Thank you for that, Lori. So I think we all know that unfortunately, this system is built so that it actually benefits a lot of folks that are already, have means, and they're the ones that actually get resources the fastest. So how can we fix that? From capital to building, how can we include those voices that are missing in the rebuilding? Joy, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I think that Lori made a lot of really important points here. And especially I appreciate that you brought up the federal government. There's about $50 billion in CDBG-DR funds that are missing in this recovery. So that's a lot of acronyms, but it's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief. And that's funds that typically go to communities after every disaster. And there's about 50 billion of that that's missing here. There's been a lot of focus on charitable dollars, and people are asking, like, where is this money? Where's that money? Well, philanthropy, I just recently saw an interesting study, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, which is a national organization that studies philanthropy. It says the last year studied was 2023, and fire philanthropy had a total of $123 million in the whole country. So philanthropy typically operates in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the federal government owes us $50 billion. Like, this is a different order of magnitude. There's actually, on the Eaton Fire side, there's actually three entities that owe us tens of billions of dollars. One is the federal government. The second is insurance, owes us tens of billions of dollars for Eaton and the Palisades. And then the third is, on the Eaton side, the utility that burned down thousands of homes and poisoned thousands of others. And that utility is Edison. So if we look back, and I've been spending in the last few weeks in preparation for this 1-year anniversary, when we look back at the history of the wildfires in California, there are 5 major wildfires in California. They all happened between 2017 and 2020. This is LA Times research. And now, so tens of thousands of homes burned. Now, 8 years later, only 38% of homes have been rebuilt. And then there's 3 factors in whether homes have been rebuilt. Number 1, pre-fire wealth. Number 2, insurance payouts. And number 3, when a utility was at fault, whether that utility fully and timely compensated the people who it harmed. So we can just look to past history, and we can ask ourselves as a community, do we want to live in a world where only 38% of us skew toward the people who have pre-fire wealth? No, I think that we all want to reject that idea. We all want to live in a world where everyone who was harmed has an opportunity to get back home. And I think to do that, we need to focus our efforts on going after and ensuring that we can unlock those 3 pots of money that owe us the billions of dollars. Because if we don't get those, then this recovery will be reserved for the wealthy.
Thank you, Joy. Diana, from your experience as a small business owner and a resident, whose voices are missing from this process?
Certainly the most vulnerable. I think one of the biggest gaps I found was that information wasn't centralized. I had to seek it out. Um, and I know how to navigate the internet, right? I know how to be resourceful. I found that my neighbors, especially my retired neighbors, were giving me more information because they didn't have small children or a business to run per se, and they were attending all these town hall meetings that frankly I didn't have the bandwidth to attend. So I think they're certainly missing, people that English is not their first language. I think people that don't know how to navigate and searches and so forth. I had a family relative say, "How can I help?" Because I told them to stop the donations because we were displaced and I didn't know where to put things. And also, we were receiving things we didn't necessarily need. Like, I don't need 4 soccer balls, This is great. And thank you for thinking of my children, but that wasn't the need. And so, my sister-in-law said, "How can I really help?" And I said, "I'm getting all of these text messages and email blasts, and I'm so overwhelmed. I don't even know what we can apply to, what criteria do we fit. Can you just put them on an Excel sheet and kind of tell me what is due when?" And so I can't even imagine not having had that type of volunteer support from a family member, and that's how I navigated. But to Joy's point, I still look for nonprofits that I know are receiving funding, but it's like, how do I qualify? Um, One of the things that really impacted me and continues is that my small business address, my legal LLC address, was at a WeWork, at a desk I was renting. But because it didn't match my home address, which was a total loss, I was receiving 0 grants for my business. And I did have business insurance. However, I only had liability insurance. We sell tortilla chips made with cactus. And so, of course, that's only if someone were to get sick off our product, God forbid. But it didn't recover all the inventory I had lost, supply, raw material, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I definitely think there's the most vulnerable people we need to look out for that don't know how to navigate all of the resources online for sure.
Thank you, Diana. Katie, how about you?
I think that from the beginning of this disaster, there has been a real focus, understandably, on property, right? We're going to rebuild houses, we're going to rebuild commercial property, we're going to rebuild infrastructure, and all of that is important. But what really to me is missing is a focus on the people who are at the center of this disaster. We could build Altadena tomorrow, right? And have, sorry, this is my dog. We could rebuild Altadena tomorrow and have it look exactly like it did on January 6th a year ago. But if we don't have all of us back, all of our neighbors, all of our community members back, what is that? What are we rebuilding and who are we rebuilding for? So putting people at the center of this rather than hoping that somehow in the process of talking about buildings and architecture and all of that we somehow get folks back, I think is an inversion of how we structure philanthropic money, how we structure government money, how we structure policy, how we structure recovery conversations by asking first and foremost, like, hey, how are you how are you doing? What do you, and like Diana saying, what do you actually need right now? 99% of the time, the answer is going to be money and time. I need more money to solve a whole bunch of new, very expensive problems that I didn't have. And I need time to do that because I still have a full-time job and I now have my brand new second unpaid full-time job, which is fire recovery. And I think for a lot of people, that is a very slow moving process. And so how we shape that, who we care about, who we're asking questions about, who we're prioritizing, I think is really critical. And that's a place where obviously, my focus is on tenants and renters. And we have had to fight very, very, very hard to be in the conversation at all.
Thank you, Katie. Lori?
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that's been said. I think the small businesses have been, by the way, Diana, the most overlooked in some shape or form. And a number of us have been concerned about that, right? And I think the LA Metro funding, Diana, I hope you're in the middle of all that. And if not, I want to make sure I turn you on to some groups that are spending lots of grants to help small business now, right? For sure. They were doing some, but there's more now. And I think the notion of people, like Katie was just talking about, we see it, we hear it, every event, every client call. You can't push too hard with trauma, right? It's like grief, they're cousins. It's got to work its way through. And if you don't deal with it, it's a problem, right? So we've had this extra sensitive layer of filters we've been trying to use, learn, and adapt with families. And because people are kind of bouncing around, that tells me as a finance person, housing person, that things were not all beautiful beforehand. And I get in a lot of trouble talking like this, but I've got to keep saying it. When you have one of the worst heirs property scenarios in our region right now, Altadena, that they've discovered now of all times, what it really means is housing's unaffordable. We're in a middle and high middle class rebuild with the Eaton Fire zone. But the people were living together in many instances because housing's unaffordable. And then someone may have come back home as a yuppie, buppy, chuppy. We talk like that sometimes in culture. But part of what I saw that I really tried to emphasize with a number of entities is during COVID and post-COVID, Black and white people, let's talk race for a second, since you're the host, Alberto, with your team, didn't live together all the time. It was normal, Blacks assimilated. These are things we know. And more like white people, when you hit 18, 19, it's time for you to go. You go into college, you go into work, but you're getting up out of here. Latinos and Asian families primarily would do intergenerational living, build upon and off of each other in a good way, generally, right? And then spin off into other housing. These are things we know as we sell real estate, build real estate. COVID, all of that collapsed for health reasons, because of the losses that were being suffered, and also because of a lack of affordability. The sheer capacity in California, it's no longer just SoCal and San Francisco. All of California is seen as unaffordable. Now, I'm a hick from Orville, up north, in Butte County, where the Paradise fires were, right? 20 minutes from my hometown. They didn't rebuild right, Joy. It took them forever. They've still got problems. Not enough people came back. The difference there is many of those homes were vacation homes, second homes, so people can make a choice to not build that vacation home back. In our fire zones, these were primary dwellings for people, primary business. Many of our business owners living above their business or in a room in the back. So what were our middle-class families in the fire zones and higher income doing, right, to survive here? And I think there's all these things that came together both before and now the during, right, that we're living through. And it's how do we piece that back together respectfully with people as center? And if somebody doesn't build a house back for 5 years and they can survive well enough to do that, that's not to be judged. We shouldn't force it. What our commentary is to people is there are scarce resources every day. And grant money, they don't know you, they don't owe you, you can't depend on that from philanthropy as your primary thrust. Philanthropy has a role, it's a pie wedge in a very big pie. And it doesn't just start over because we're in a new calendar year, right? And so those scarce resources, trying to find them, like Diana talked about, it's navigating that is so complex. So my hope is that families will depend more on the nonprofit sector, but ask questions to the right providers. I'm speaking now often to nonprofits saying, do no harm. Good intentions doesn't mean you build a house back. Good intentions doesn't mean you get the right resources to sustain a family for all of 2026 if they have an opportunity to get under rebuild, right, into 2027, 28. I visited New Orleans on the 20th anniversary last year, and we had a national conference with a number of us who do community development work. Their rebuild is not great 20 years later. It's good in some spaces, but not excellent throughout. I left there fired up about our region in the Eaton Fire Zone, Palisades Fire Zone. I said, not on our watch, right? How do we do no harm as service providers, but also on our watch? Make sure that we do even better, that we learn from these other disasters and do better work to serve and care for families in the days ahead. And that I think there are a number of us committed to that and to helping make sure that people's voices are uplifted. And anything we can do, you guys know, call us. But I also think it's the collaboration, the strength that we all have together is critical. And then the investors, last piece. I got asked about whether the investors buying in different fire zones is some huge problem. I said, it's not as bad as it's going to get if people don't stabilize. And, we've got to figure out that stability component. And I think it's going to help us.
Thank you, Lori. So I see a few questions from the audience right now. But before we move on to those questions, I'm going to ask each one of you one specifically to you. So I'm going to start with Katie. Uh, Katie, from your perspective, what has the recovery process revealed about how tenants are or not included in recovery, and what barriers remain for getting tenants back home?
Yeah, I mean, big emphasis on are not. Um, it has been really, really challenging as a tenant individually. I've lived in Altadena for 16 years. I've been a renter the whole time. And we in Altadena have at least 25% of our population, probably higher than that, who are renters and tenants. We're talking 10,000, 15,000 people in Altadena. That in a town of 43,000, right? This is a lot of folks. And in Altadena, we have something called invisible density. So it's not like we have a ton of big high-rise apartment buildings. We have those long, narrow lots where maybe there's a single family home at the front and then a back house and an ADU and a garage conversion and something somebody's uncle built in 1978 that like, oh, whatever. But we have a lot of housing that has disappeared overnight. We have a large population of tenants who have extremely long tenures. And by that, I mean not just 5 years, 10 years, but 15, 20, 30, 40 years of residence in Altadena. And these are members of the community who have been absolutely overlooked. The only advances we have seen in including tenants in the recovery have come as the result of sustained advocacy and basically yelling at LA County and other government and public agencies to say, hey, we are here too. We, the Altadena Tenants Union, had to sue Los Angeles County for basic habitability enforcement. At every single stage of this process, it has been a huge fight. I mean, LA County has just released a rental recovery program right now that tenants cannot apply for. It's only open to landlords.
Right.
What are we doing? What are we doing? And so to look at a quarter to a third of your population and say, you are disposable, you are not important, because the home that you lived in on January 7th wasn't one that you had the deed to. And your loss, your entire life being turned upside down is somehow less important. And I mean, I've had people say to me, I know many tenants have experienced this. We have the conversation, oh, you're from Altadena, that's so terrible. You're going to rebuild. Well, I don't know. I'm a renter, so it's a little bit difficult. Oh, well, you can live anywhere. You can go anywhere. This idea that somehow, because you don't own the property you live in, you have less of an investment in your community. You have less of a place in that community. That is absolutely not true. And it is a tragedy on top of a disaster that we have as tenants have had to fight so hard for basic fundamental issues from the beginning, and that we are still fighting for those a year later.
Thank you. Thank you. Joy, I'm going to go to you next. You've heard hundreds of stories about insurance delays and denials. What are the worst patterns you've seen, and what would real accountability look like?
Well, so, this issue of insurance delays and denials for people who have insurance, which is not everyone, is pervasive. The irony is that California actually has some of the strongest consumer protections against delays and denials and underpayments. The problem is that they haven't been enforced. They're all in regulation, and so they all depend on our state insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, to enforce them. And he's not done so effectively to such an extent that now 70% of all Eaton and Palisades fire survivors who have insurance are citing delays and denials as a major impediment to their recovery. So in this recovery, insurance, which was supposed to be our safety net, has shifted into a wrecking ball through people's finances. It sucked away people's money and also their time. Casey's talking about money and time as people, express that it's like a full-time job to fight for the insurance benefits that they've already paid for in full. A couple of ways that this is happening is one is indefinite delays. So right now, an insurance company has to respond to your claim within 15 days. They have to give an up or down in 40 days, and then they have to pay within 30 days of claims that they accept. That is in theory, but we have people who've gone for a whole year and not gotten paid. For example, you hear a lot about rotating adjusters. You have a new adjuster every three weeks. There was a new San Francisco Chronicle investigation that showed actual training manuals from State Farm that says, do not put your decisions into writing. Don't accept and don't deny in writing. You just give oral ones. And then suddenly there's a new person who says, yeah, I don't agree with the previous guy. Let me tell you what the new situation is. They don't put that in writing. So these kinds of things go on forever. They're all illegal. Tomorrow, there will be an announcement at our press conference of legislation that will specifically address these kinds of activities. But I guess I'll just say that they are holding up the recovery because they're keeping people from coming back home. There's illegal denials of smoke damage. There are some things that could be done that just at least get people back home and on with their lives. Unfortunately, as we're seeing, these are structural. These are not errors in the system. They are how the system actually works. Last thing I'll say here is that survivors have organized now. Survivors, Eaton Fire survivors and Palisades fire survivors. Together, we have already unlocked over $100 million in delayed insurance payments by driving this accountability. We drove a county investigation, and immediately, within a day in November, State Farm started issuing checks of $2 million, $200,000 directly into people's homes. So the fact is they can pay. They just have chosen not to because there hasn't been the enforcement that's needed. So what we all need to do, those of us who want to be able to have a region recover from disaster, just is to come together and work together, educate ourselves about insurance and all these other sources of funds that are needed, and together secure those billions of dollars that are needed.
Thank you for that. One last question before we move on to the audience questions. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function. Lori, this one's for you. You've observed that many families have been taking a wait-and-see approach to rebuilding and committing to return. From your 35 years in community development, what does this collective hesitation tell us about the factors in this disaster recovery?
About the factors. Well, I describe everything probably growing up with a mom for a caterer like a pie, right? And there's many pieces of the pie, the components that make it up. And I think we've heard very clear, specific components today. And I know that when we see something missing from those ingredients, it has an impact. If you take the eggs out of cake batter, does it stand, right? For those who are vegan, they've figured out other ways to make it fluffy and still hold together, right? But your normal cake flattens. And so we're seeing some flattening because the system has been broken. We are a part of a national network of housing and small business technical service providers, right? And lenders. That's NHS anywhere in the country. So disaster, when I say it's every day, it's because I get the emails, right? Whether it's a small town fire or like Paradise was, or something more major, a Chicago, New York, and LA region. And I think that I just keep seeing us not learning well enough sometimes. And groups like After the Fire, I'll give them a shout out. Crazy friends, right? Who've lived through fire and then rebounded. But it's the same whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes. We've got to get the best practices very visible so that people have more options to choose. On money, all the misinformation that went out about federal resources, local and state resources, the government in general, okay? What you just described, Joy, with insurance, some of us proposed an insurance finance authority within a week of the fires starting. We need a statewide solution for California. And it's not just for fire, it's for all kinds of hazards, disaster response that's needed, resilience, right? My neighborhood I live in near the airport would go up in smoke in a heartbeat because everybody loves green. But are they planting the right kind of, flowers and trees? 2 or 3 points of egress, not 10, meaning how you come and go from the neighborhood. These are things as builders that we know. The Palisades, again, I get in some trouble, but we know there are complications there. So as we rebuild, are we going to do the work? Is it affordable to do the real work to make sure that people have more safety on the rebuild? And fire resilient properties, again, these are not new concepts, everybody. So are we going to demand the enforcement, not that holds us up, but that holds the standard? And then the resources should be able to fill in with that, as was earlier described, so that every person can rebuild. Edison, the settlement's out, right? We've said clearly to them, we don't purport or not support what Edison's got to do. They need to have themselves in the conversation and spend money, right? People need to be able to make the choice to accept or reject a settlement offer. Our job as a nonprofit service provider has been to help people walk through it and see if it works for them. These are very individual decisions, but all of those add up to building back a stronger community. The tenants, oh my God, Katie, right? We are so aware of that program. We help do initial design. We're not running it. Reasons, not enough tenants get to have a say. You got to let the tenants speak. And so there's just this tough stuff, you guys. But I think if we're all voicing it, we're joining each other. I don't know any of you till today, right? Some of you. How do we work together? And I think, Alberto, our solutions, I know it sounds Pollyanna. I'm older. I probably reach back a little more now. But working together matters. And I think the only way we get people in the center of everything as we rebuild or consider rebuilding. We bought a property from a lady early on as a senior who didn't want to stay. She didn't have an intergenerational thing she could do. She moved to a mobile home park, right? For seniors. Beautiful opportunity for her. All of those choices should be on the table for every family, every business owner. And if that's there, then I think we'll see some goodness really come out and a phenomenal community that was already there in either fire zone case be able to come back. There will be change. There will be some things we don't like, right? But accepting that and then working with each other to advocate, demand, strengthen, monitor, it's going to be critical. And the moving parts piece is elected officials. The moving parts piece is the government resources. We've got to stabilize some of that. And I hope that, my comments are not offensive. I'm suggesting that after a lot of years of doing disaster response, we can see the gaps and the families get shafted. That's just the nature of it. Tenants, they get the short end of the stick. That's just the nature of it. So how do we invert that and decide that we'll build back differently this time?
Thank you so much for that, Lori. Now we're going to open up the floor. We only have a few minutes. Apologies for that, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. But we are we are recording all of them, and our team will try to get back to them or forward them to the appropriate panelists to answer your question. So the first one that we have that I see here is for the group. Since there are so many individuals of older age, how is the rebuilding taking that into consideration with regards to construction of homes, property, etc.? And would anyone like to take that one?
I could speak up for seniors. Is that the question?
Yeah.
I didn't do so great a job. I was waxing on about other things, but seniors are first and foremost in both fire zones as a priority and the most vulnerable in many respects. And many own their homes and had paid off. They paid off their homes, so they didn't have proper or any insurance. And we see that at least 50% of the time with seniors right now. So the considerations there are really about whether they want the home back that they had, as an example, or do they want some other alternative form of living so that they can afford it, right, and not get into an unsustainable situation. If they were a renter and the property burned down or was severely damaged, many have a reverse mortgage, and that's got to be dealt with. And so we don't want to see whatever tools were there not be used properly or not be available. And so I think there's a lot of concern and focus on our senior population, and that it was a higher number than we see in many, many communities in both fire zones. And I don't know that there's been a permanent solution defined for people coming back with no debt. And that's a huge deal, right? And so if there's a lack of insurance availability or coverage, and a person doesn't want debt, I think I've seen that as the most difficult senior response scenario. But there are many of us finding the money we can, right? And then encouraging alternative living, whether it's ADUs, duplexes, senior or assisted living. There's these details. Building an ADU back in the back of a home, that was the biggest response we saw during COVID. Thousands of units, a number of us touched COVID and post-COVID for granny flats, right? And being able to help our seniors live a little differently, maybe in the back home while their families live in the front. So I think a lot of conversation, a lot of push toward resources, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm encouraging people, don't lose hope. Let's stay in this and figure it out together.
Yeah, if I could just speak briefly, we have a number of seniors and elders in Altadena who are tenants, who are renters, many of them who have been in their homes for a really long time. I mean, I lived in my apartment for 16 years. My upstairs neighbor, who was an older lady, had been there even longer than I had. I mean, there are lots of people who have been there for a really long time. The longer you've been a tenant in Altadena, the bigger the shock is coming into the LA housing market, right? Most of our housing in Altadena that was rental housing was rent stabilized. I was talking to a lady the other day. She's lived in her home for decades. She's got grandkids. She's paying $500 a month, right? You're not going to rent a home in Los Angeles County anywhere for $500 a month. I was paying $1,446 a month. I'm not going to rent it. I can tell you, I am not renting any place to live anywhere in LA County for that amount of money. So the population of folks, particularly seniors who have been in their homes for a really long time, are having an even bigger shock coming into that housing market. Many of them do not have W-2 income, may not have the credit scores that you need to qualify for housing. And the process of navigating many of these recovery resources, like Diana was saying earlier, it's all online. It's very difficult, especially if you are someone who is maybe not comfortable navigating that process. Maybe English isn't your first language, having to scan 10 million QR codes and try to figure something out. It's really, really hard. And a lot of neighbors I have talked to personally have sort of thrown their hands up and gone, well, this is not help for me, I guess. This is not for me. So I'll just figure it out. And we have a lot of folks who are living in really untenable conditions.
Thank you, Katie. Diana, I'm hoping you can take the next question, or at least you can offer your perspective. Small business recovery depends on people coming home. Why aren't we prioritizing rapid repopulation as both economic and family healing strategy after the Eaton Fire?
I don't know, Alberto. Why aren't we prioritizing it? Yeah, it's a sore spot. Absolutely. I think there's a lot that as an ecosystem we can be doing, cell phones now, we can all be getting pings or text messages on different types of opportunities. It would have been nice for somebody from the county to have called all the zip codes. We never received a call from our county guiding us. As you said, small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and they provide so many jobs. I think we should be prioritized. And if you're in a situation like myself where a lot of grants did not apply to me, it would also have been a lot easier if grants were much shorter, because some of these grants are like, whew, 10, 15 pages. And it'd be great to get a 3-question pre-criteria grant to even see if you make it to the next level before you spend a week applying for a grant that they're only going to be denied. But I wish I had a better answer for you. I think small business should be prioritized, and I look to my fellow panelists to see if they have any insights on that.
Would anyone else like to follow?
Well, I think I answer this just because I also own my own business. And so I feel the pain. We are a service-based consulting practice, so less of the sort of inventory and equipment losses, but also someone who operated out of my home. I think in Altadena, especially, we have a ton of working families, and many, many, many of those folks are people who are owning or running small businesses, family businesses, 1, 2, 3 people operations, many based out of their homes. And I don't think that the recovery mechanisms that exist now are prioritizing those folks, both from a structural standpoint of how do we make sure we stabilize these people, and from a policy standpoint of how do we make sure that the process people go through is one that is navigable and has actual results. Diana, the 15 pages of grant application, yeah, it's totally unsustainable. You can't possibly do that. And asking people to try to navigate an incredibly complex system when they're already dealing with questions of survival is ridiculous. And as we ask questions about what the future of Altadena looks like, there's a lot of like, oh, what if we have, outdoor cafes and dog parks and this and that and the other thing? What about if we bring back the people who run, small construction projects and electricians and home-based food businesses and people who are writers and artists and cinematographers and creative folks? I mean, Altadena is home to a ton of people like that. And just because your business is not visible from the street when I drive down Loma Alta doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
Yeah, I think just to add to that really quickly, it would be great if, these RFPs that are going out, even for some of these big events like the World Cup and Olympics, if we had some sort of not preferential treatment, but maybe just closely looked at for businesses, both brick and mortar and also the home-based businesses, just more opportunities. We can't look to Altadena, right, necessarily, but outside of our extended community to say, would you give me, a frontline pass, maybe for a temporary time, for a year or two, or at least a jump at the opportunity for businesses that have been affected in this matter, to help us bounce back, is something that should be considered.
Absolutely.
Alberto, I was just going to say, I
Yeah.
want to do a shout out for the Small Business Development Corporation Network. And there's a number of service providers. I don't know how well tied in people are, but those service providers have both capital resources, grant resources, and navigating resources for small businesses.
We can include that in the follow-up email.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, Joy, Diana, Lori, thank you so much for being here with us and offering your perspective for the work that you're doing to rebuild the community. We appreciate it. Gabby, Sylvia, thank you for your research. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We will be sending a recording of the program this afternoon with more resources. If you need to reach us, this is how you can do it. I will include this information too in the follow-up email that is going out later today. Thank you.